Hello and welcome to the British Sitcom History Podcast. You are listening to part 2 of our look at the peak years of Red Dwarf. Part 1 was last week. Have you listened to it yet? If the answer is no, go back and do that one first. Although actually we haven't even started talking about our selected episode, which is The Inquisitor, Series 5, Episode 2. If you're unfamiliar with our show, then we have already looked at Red Dwarf once before. We looked at the early years, now we're at the peak years, and we've already talked about all the major changes that were made into Series 3 and the other changes that have come along as we've gone into Series 4 and 5 and eventually 6. Lots to talk about because Red Dwarf is such a great big thing. Let's get back to it.
Well, okay, so much later than we usually do, why don't we start talking about our selected episode, which is Series 5, Episode 2, The Inquisitor.
Yes. So, immediately we get a fairly rare thing, a cold open.
Yeah, it's a cold open. I was going to say it's a pre-credit sequence, but it's after the credits. So what is it? It's a cold open. You know what you're talking about. It's a cold open. That's exactly what it is. And it's like we get a nice bit of model work, which is sort of exterior of what looks like some sort of station on a planet. Never explained. That doesn't really matter. Although
Totally
I do
new
want
thing.
to know.
I don't think they've ever used that before. So.
I do want to know where this is. Because basically what this is the setup for the Inquisitor. So we're inside, there's a guy in bed, a guy we've never seen before, some random guy called Thomas Ullman. And the Inquisitor arrives and he erases him from history because he's not lived a worthy life and replaces him with someone else. And that's like the setup for the episode. It's a nice little setup to tell us who the Inquisitor is and what he does. But I have got questions. Like, what? Who is this guy? When did this happen? Where is this?
Well, that's the whole point. The Inquisitor travels through time and space and to judge everyone.
Oh, so is that the whole point?
It could be anywhere.
Oh, I see.
Anytime. It is unusual to have a cold open like this where we're setting up the antagonist, basically, outside of relation to the Dwarfers. So that is fairly unusual. A little bit expositionary, although it's not really because we get all the exposition later. This is sort of setting it up. So,
we do.
Yeah. If we didn't have that, would it make sense? Yeah, well, you know.
It's good. It gives you drama. It gives us jeopardy. It gives us stakes. Shall we talk about the Inquisitor himself? Well, actually, the Inquisitor, I want to talk about Jack Doherty, who plays him. This is right in my time. I know Jack Doherty. I knew Jack Doherty really well. He was a sketch comedian, and he was in a sketch show called Absolutely, which was one of my very favourite things in the world. I looked it up. It was 1989 to 1993. So I am 14 to 16 years old there. That is exactly when you want to see silly sketch comedy. So I absolutely had Jack Doherty, but it also had Morwenna Banks and John Sparks. Gordon Kennedy, who we have also seen in Red Dwarf.
Well, let me pick you up there. Morwenna Banks appeared in Red Dwarf.
Morwenna Banks is also in Red Dwarf.
She was the lift operator woman, computer type
I did know that, yes. And Murray Hunter and Pete Bakey. I would say to anybody who hasn't seen Absolutely, it's worth revisiting. I sort of went back and had a look with a bit of trepidation because I thought, well, maybe I'm remembering this with rose-tinted spectacles. And, it is a bit dated, but it's still funny. It still made me laugh. And some of that might have been nostalgia, but I enjoyed it.
Well, obviously the guys who wrote sketches for Absolutely also wrote sketches for Spitting Image, and that is how they knew Grant and Naylor, who were basically head writers on Spitting Image by the time they finished. So that's their connection. That's why they've gone, hey, come and do a part in this. Hey, come and do this. Jack, you're 6'4" or something. We want a big dominating person for this thing. Yeah. So they've done a lot of that, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. I want to talk about Rob Grant a bit more and what else he did, but Jack Doherty appeared in the Strangers. That was one of his shows. So I'll come back to that. But yeah, there's connections there. They obviously all just know each other and work together.
The other thing I know of Jack Doherty, I remember about him, was that he was, when Channel 5 launched, he was the host of their late night American style talk show. Yeah. They were trying to launch a sort of David Letterman. The problem being, of course, only 17 people could watch Channel 5 at the first, so it didn't really take off. But it was certainly a cultural thing. It was a British attempt at one of those late night talk shows.
Yeah, and it was Monday to Friday, I think, wasn't it? It was like 5 nights a week, which was not the done thing in Britain at that time, and still isn't really.
So, yeah, Jack Doherty was at the time one of those faces that you would recognise. But of course, we don't see his face. As the Inquisitor, he is just a voice.
And it is him, it's not like a stunt double, they did voiceover later. And, the voice he's doing is a bit post-production to make it a bit more gravelly and what have you. But the interesting thing is, the very end, if I'll just jump to the end of the episode where Lister and the Inquisitor have a kind of a bit of a face-to-face, the Inquisitor pulls up his mask and indeed it is Jack Doherty's face underneath there. And they reshot it because they thought, this looks crap. The Inquisitor lifts off his mask and it's like a pasty face behind it. It's like when Darth Vader takes his helmet off. It just completely destroys the magic. And so they reshot it with the mask on. So, we were supposed to see his face, but, it just looked like a sort of pasty Scottish bloke in a stupid helmet. So it didn't quite work. But, I think it gives it a great effect. And the costume there, the mask for the Inquisitor was made especially. And it looks really cool, I think.
It looks all right. It's not. I haven't got that
cool.
far.
What more do you want?
Well, nothing. But I hadn't even really I couldn't even describe it, to be honest. It's just a monster mask, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's nicely done. And the rest of the costume was just thrown together by whatever they could find, just like dark, spooky things, So we just concentrate on the face.
So we cut from this cold open to Starbug. And we got our protagonists on Starbug. Lister is reading a comic book version of the Aeneid, Virgil's Aeneid.
Yeah.
I have notes.
Okay.
It's not the Aeneid. It's the Odyssey. They go on to describe the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey, not the Aeneid.
I'm not familiar enough with the classics.
Well, listen, I'm nervous about saying this, and if it turns out that it's the same story and one was Roman and one was Greek, I could be, I might be wrong on this. But basically, it's the Odyssey. So Crichton describes it as the epic tale of Agamemnon's pursuit of Helen of Troy. That's the Odyssey. And the reason why I'm jagging on this is the Odyssey. Red Dwarf is the Odyssey. How have we not mentioned this before? This is it. And they got it wrong. The Odyssey is Odysseus returning from the wars, trying to find his way home. The whole story is him overcoming monsters and oceans and trying to get back to his wife. He wants to be shipwrecked and comatose.
I found this scene interesting because we don't draw any great metaphor from it. It is just a bit of banter between them. It's just a little one-scene thing. It kind of doesn't translate to the rest of the episode. It's just a bit of fun. And I think they're very well written. It all works really nicely. But that does speak to me that the episode wasn't running long enough. We need to add something. We could drop this into any episode. It wouldn't make any difference,
As we are having our banter, suddenly Lister is taken control of. He is possessed by the spirit of the Inquisitor. This is crap CGI.
What, the little electric bolt?
There's like a little electric spark that's going from off screen to him. And he pulls a face like he's just had root canal.
Talking about the CGI kind of bits here, particularly in the Inquisitor, whenever he kind of puts a bubble around anyone, he shoots them and there's this kind of whole bubble. This is all CGI, right? And this is, you're saying it's crap CGI. This is 1992. This is cutting edge CGI is what it is. And from what I understand, the company that was doing it kind of really took this on as a challenge and oh, look, you've got these great ideas we want to play with. And so it was all kind of done, in a very mutual way, as opposed to this is what we need to do and who's the cheapest bidder. It's like, it was a way for this cutting edge technology to have a way of showing off what they can do.
What the sort of stasis bubble, whatever you want to call it, I would agree with that, actually. It is a good effect. Cool, that sort of holds up quite well, and you're right, it's 30 years ago.
And when they get evaporated and stuff and sort of turn into a skeleton, that sort of like you can't do that, a few years before.
Yeah, no, I accept that. It wasn't a general criticism of the CGI. It was very specific. That little lightning bolt is very poor.
Well, I mean, it just how do you express that someone is taking over the body? But it happens to them all, kind of. Well, most of them throughout the show. The Inquisitor speaks through them.
So what's happening is our crew are on Starbug, and Starbug is being tractor beamed back to Red Dwarf, whatever you want to call it. It is under the control of the Inquisitor, and so whilst they are on their way back to be judged. Inquisited? What's the verb here? To inquire. Whilst they're... No, that can't be right. Whilst they're on their way back to be judged, there's a discussion. There is now this verbal exposition from Crichton of what is the Inquisitor. There's a nice gag, and you were talking earlier about editing for the punchlines. There's a great gag here where Crichton says, That is the Inquisitor. He prunes away the wastrels, expunges the wretched, and deletes the worthless. And Rimmer replies, we're in big trouble. And the timing of that punchline is instant.
That is the Inquisitor. He prunes away the wastrels, expunges the wretched, and deletes the worthless. We're in big trouble.
And you could make an argument for actually a little pause would have been basically the way I just did it there. You know, a little pause, a thought, and we're in big trouble. But it works. Far be it from me to tell these professional comedy writers about comic timing. It works. It worked perfectly. Just this instant comeback. But I wonder if that was the way it was scripted and the way it was performed, or if that's the way it was edited.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it. You know, you do it one way and you can edit it, tighten it up a bit later on, and it might work. I really like this whole bit, though. The Crichton getting a bit of chance to play around and do all this exposition, but doing it in a very dramatic way. It works nicely. And I really like the concept. You know, these classic urban legends, you know, like your kids round a campfire telling ghost stories kind of vibe.
Yeah.
It's that feel, but with a sci-fi element. You know, this rogue simulant who's travelling through time, judging people and erasing people from time. It's got that vibe.
Yeah, but the problem here is that's the way Crichton's telling the story. Like, they're around a campfire and, you know, he's got a candle under his chin and he's telling this scary story. But they're actually being dragged towards it by it right now. It should be a lot more scary than just a sort of tall tale around the campfire.
It's a comedy.
Okay. Incidentally, just a tangent, Lister in this scene has got a blanket round him. Does that blanket say Titan Hilton on it?
He's nicked it from a hotel at Titan.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. That's a great little bit of production design.
That's probably from series 1. That I bet they've had that all the way.
I really like that. A really nice detail.
So we get to a point where they are to be judged.
Can we talk about the Judgment Chamber?
Yes, yes, please.
I was really curious about this set. It looked like a sort of standard spaceship Red Dwarf floor, like a sort of like metal grating corrugated iron type thing. But the Inquisitor is sat in this green, this weird green wingback throne. Looked like a sort of Etsy version of the Game of Thrones throne.
Yeah.
And there are these weird gothic candles everywhere. Like, what's the vibe? What is this guy's aesthetic? He's got all of time and space to choose from. Why has he gone for this sort of pound shop Dracula's castle?
Well, probably because they only had a couple of quid to spend. So for a start, that throne is far too elaborate. They've nicked that from somewhere. They found that on Shepperton's studio somewhere. Definitely,
yes.
They didn't make that. They'll just like turn the lights off and a bit of candelabra just to pick out a bit of detail. And you see this every now and then. And again, you've got to remember that what they're doing here in Red Dwarf on the budget is remarkable. And so you occasionally get these bits that don't quite kind of like live up to the aesthetic. There's another one in Justice where, you know, they go into Justice World and Rimmer goes on trial for killing everyone on Red Dwarf. And the Judgment Chamber there is, again, like there's a sort of zebra print pattern that gives a sense of perspective, and then like just smoky lights just to kind of block out the fact that there's a studio wall 20 feet behind you. So there's nothing to it really. You know, that you just have to make the best of that sometimes, I think. In terms of sets and locations and stuff like that, when they really come into their own, Polymorph 2, when they go to the Guelph village, all these huts and stuff, that's because that was something that was being filmed on Shepperton, and they went and had a look and like, oh, what can we use this for? This like mud hut village, right. We can use that for something. And then they did a night shoot there. So in Gunmen of the Apocalypse, which is another fan favourite as well, and won an international Emmy, by the way, that episode. Oh. They had this idea of doing a Western, and they said, look, we're not going to write it unless we can film it. So can you find us somewhere to do it, and then we'll write it. And they found this, it's called Laredo, this little Western street in Kent, that some kind of mad guy in the 70s was like, I'm going to build a Western town. And then it's been like, it's got a group of enthusiasts, and they build their own kind of houses and like a sheriff's office and stuff like that there. And it still goes today. And it seems like it's primarily, you know, apart from the kind of select few actually kind of use it and live there to a large extent, not quite live there, but you know, it's a whole hobby thing. It seems like its main sort of funding comes from filming locations, because it's this really well done Western town in Britain that you can film on.
Do you know, I must confess, I hadn't even thought about where that was filmed until now. I think I just assumed it was behind a studio somewhere, but we're not in Hollywood, are we?
On a TV
that's where they
budget,
film Westerns in Hollywood.
Yeah, and that's why, like, so for another example, you'll see in one episode where Lister is in a virtual reality game, and he's like a 1930s noir detective.
Yes.
And it's like a wall and a car. Like, that's all you can see.
Yeah,
that's what they built on a set. Like that's so, that's the difference. Having this western street just means they can open it up and just gives them loads of room to play with. But let's go back to the Judgment Chamber, which is a dark room with a couple of candles in it.
So for the umpteenth time, we confront the fact that Rimmer is an awful person. And it's interesting you mentioned the episode Justice from Series 4. I think there's a lot of similarity actually between these two episodes. Not it's not a complete copy, but a couple of times when I was remembering back and making notes on this before I watched it again, I was remembering the wrong episode. But let's be specific here. The first to be judged is Rimmer. Mm-hmm. Of course, the trick here is that the Inquisitor lifts his helmet up and he is Rimmer, so they are judging themselves, so there's no place to hide. And again, we sort of confront this fact that Rimmer is awful, which we've seen before in Justice. We see in Rimmer World, where every time Rimmer is confronted by an alternate version of himself, it's awful.
But that's Rimmer, self-loathing. That's his his basic tenet, isn't it? And that's what we get here. He kind of just sort of tries to justify himself and then goes, well, what do you expect? I hate myself. I've got no talent. Everyone around me has always hated me. What do you want me to do?
You are a slimy, despicable, rat-hearted green discharge of a man, aren't you?
That's a very Red Dwarf type of line, isn't it?
I like it. So at this point, we don't get any outcome, any judgment. We flash and suddenly the cat appears in the Inquisition chamber. And this is the most relatable part of the whole episode for me.
Justify your existence. What contribution have you made? I've given pleasure to the world because I have such a beautiful ass. Well, that's true. Can I go now? That's your case? You need more? Some might say that's a pretty shallow argument. Some might say I'm a pretty shallow guy, but a shallow guy with a great ass.
Yeah, great stuff. Cat completely oblivious as usual. Doesn't realise the danger he's in. Doesn't even attempt to justify himself. Well, he does, but on his own level.
Is he completely oblivious, or is he just like, yeah, I know what's going on, but yeah, I don't care?
Maybe look. Well, this is justifying myself. What do you want?
Yeah, on his terms, that is justification.
We have a nice little philosophical bit from Crichton.
So yeah, Crichton comes in next. And this is the bit that really interests me. He says, I'm programmed to live unselfishly, and therefore any good works I do come not out of fine motives, but as a result of a series of binary commands I am compelled to obey. To me, this is the meat of the episode. This is about predestination, predeterminism, free will. And we see it with Crichton. It's obvious. He's programmed. He can only be a certain way. Can he break his programming or not? That's perhaps a bigger question. Isn't that the same for Rimmer? Isn't that the same for all of us?
It never quite goes really deep into it, but that's what this episode is exploring, right? That's our sense of determination, our free will. I think that really chimes with Lister, all the things he could have done and never did, but do we blame his upbringing for that? Was he in a situation where he was not expected to do anything, whereas Rimmer was expected to do anything and did not have the ability to do it? That's the difference between the two of them.
But I find this really interesting, this idea of predeterminism. Like, I'm no philosopher, as you will learn in the next few seconds. But, this idea that the predictability of physical systems, if you hit a snooker ball at a certain angle, it's going to go in the hole. And you can apply that same logic to molecules. But we don't have the knowledge or the processing power to be able to predict those things. But in theory, we could. And if we are to believe that the Big Bang was this moment which spewed all matter out into the universe, this fixed moment in time, everything that we do is just an expression of that matter. We are that matter. And therefore, every action we take is predetermined in that moment. Or can I just scratch my head whenever I want? I don't know. Like, I am very half-arsing this philosophy. I feel like it's sort of 1992 and I'm at a party. And frankly, someone should be having sex with me soon.
You've been watching Open University again, haven't you?
Yeah.
Well, to bring it on a human level, the choices we make, the self-will that we commit, is that actual choices we make, or is it just a series of chemicals and electrical impulses in our brain that we have no real control over it?
The illusion of choice.
Yeah. So the idea of, okay, you have not made the right choices, you have not lived a worthwhile life, you are going to be replaced. I think it's a very interesting concept. And then the sort of payoff of that, when we got to find out who is going to be erased and the reasons for that, just jumping forward slightly, Lister also gets judged and basically tells him to swivel.
So Lister's interaction with the Inquisitor is pretty brief. He tells him to spin on it. And then we come back for the verdict.
And basically, Lister and Crichton are deleted and the Cat and Rimmer are not. And the idea being, by their own low standards, they have acquitted themselves. But you and the mechanoid, you could have been so much more.
It's like being at school again, isn't it? You've not fulfilled your potential, guys.
That's what it was like at school for us, Gareth. Yeah. And that's why we would have been judged.
Oh yeah, give a gold star to the idiot in the corner because you've written his name.
Yeah. But that's the beauty of judging themselves.
And now I'm presenting a podcast about a science fiction show that's 30 years old. So how do you like that, Mrs. Illingworth?
We do get them being erased, and then there is a sudden twist where Crichton, in some sort of time shenanigans, pops up and saves them. And so then we're in this limbo. We are between worlds.
Let's just talk about this episode now then, because when we were talking about which episode to do, I wanted to do this one because I like this idea of free will that we've just talked about. And you sort of said, well, yeah, there's all that, but then it just becomes a silly chase film, which it does, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And I think that is a bit of a problem with Red Dwarf. They try to deal with these big concepts, but ultimately it's like a half-hour show, and it's really difficult to get that in. You mentioned Rimmerworld earlier, and that's a really fantastic, some great concepts there. There's huge jeopardy for the characters. And the last 30 seconds, they just teleport away and everything's fine. And it's like, it just felt like a cop-out, a sort of, Deus Ex Machina. And that happens quite a bit in Red Dwarf. And this is not quite such an extreme example. But, we go from this exploration of the nature of free will to a shoot-'em-up.
I mean, it's sitcom world, right? You've got to get back to the status quo, and there's the things like the matter paddle when they go to Wax World in Meltdown.
Yeah.
And then that matter paddle is kind of like, they don't use that to go to a different planet and do something else. They use it once, they've got to add a bit of an adventure out of it, and then it's like, okay, forget that. This thing that teleports us around the world, the universe. There's a certain sitcom reality we have to just accept. Sure. But yeah, within an episode itself, you set up this concept. How much can you explore it? Yeah, it's limited, isn't it? And you've got to have a bit of fun and excitement and adventure in the whole thing as well. So It's a tough act, and I think Red Dwarf does it very well. But that is why perhaps you don't get very many sci-fi sitcoms, because in a sitcom you want to be dealing with like, oh no, we have to wallpaper the house and the vicar's coming round to tea. That's the kind of plot concept.
To contrast this with another episode, in The Last Day, that's the one where we have Gordon Kennedy, the other absolutely alumnus, who has come to delete Crichton. That deals with the concept of Silicon Heaven, the afterlife, the idea of doing the right thing in this life for reward in the next. And of course, Silicon Heaven, what a ridiculous concept. But that's then used against the Gordon Kennedy character, and he melts down because he can't cope with the idea that there might not be a Silicon Heaven. And I wanted to see that in the Inquisitor. I wanted to see the Inquisitor bested by having to confront the idea of free will and the fact that what he'd been doing was unfair, and that he was not using his existence in the right way.
Yeah, I understand that, yeah.
But we didn't. We just chopped his arm off and shot him. Well,
there's a bit of an old backfiring time gauntlet trick. It's quite a clever ending. We'll come to that in a second.
Spoilers.
So yeah, what we get next is Crichton and Lister have sort of been deleted from time, but still exist in a mishap, and so they are running around the ship, but they've been replaced by another version of Lister and Crichton. So first of all, they're running around and they meet up with Rimmer and Kat, who don't recognize them, of course.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of fun there with them describing Rimmer. Then the other Lister and Crichton turn up.
Yeah, and I think this is quite timely as we are recording this. The guy who plays the alternative Lister just recently died last week, didn't he? Jake Abraham.
Yeah, Jake Abraham just died, prostate cancer. Yeah, I would just as well. I think it was literally the day I watched this episode that happened, so it was very timely in that sense. Jake Abraham was a friend of Craig Charles. I don't know quite. They just knew each other from the circuit, I guess. They're both from Liverpool, so I guess they were. Yeah. They knew. So I think Craig Charles kind of recommended him as play an alternate version of himself.
Yeah.
And he's just an actor of working the last 30 years, but not much sitcom. He is in an episode of the British Empire just before this, actually. But again, they just do so little with it. We established this new Lister and new Crichton. Crichton literally has one line. He's basically an extra. I looked him up, actually, the guy who plays in Tim Yates. His only other credit is the previous episode of this series in which he is an extra. He's basically in a hologram on the hologram. I thought maybe he was on crew or something, but he's got no other credits in terms of crew. I think he was brought in as an extra for the week before, just like, we just need to want someone to stand here. You don't need to say anything. That's an extra's gig. And they've gone, do you know what? We need someone for next week. You got time?
You're about the same height as Robert Llewellyn.
We need to put a big latex head on you. We need to make a mould of your face. Have you got a couple of hours for us to do that? And then they're doing because they would need someone to come in the week before to make the mask for him. So I think they may have just been, look, you're hanging around. Can you come back in next week? Who knows? But he gets to say one line, which is all right, I suppose. But it's a frustrating because we get one conversation between the two listers, and then it feels like that could be developed a lot more.
Yeah, without jumping too far ahead, the alternative Lister and Crichton get blown away pretty quickly by the Inquisitor. Yeah, like you've got Jake Abraham in, use him.
And not just for comedy purposes, but to explore that idea of like, okay, you're a different version of me. And let's note, this different version of Lister has ended up in the exact same position. He's adrift in space. Yes. The Red Dwarf crew are dead. Rimmer is still a hologram. All that stuff that he...
So how has he used his life better?
Yeah.
Or is there no difference because we have no free will?
Well, is that the point?
Who knows? Because he just blew him away.
To some extent in this episode, we do get the sort of the Crichton and Lister show. We get a lot of them, just the two of them together.
Yeah.
The Cat and Rimmer just pop up here and there. These are alternative Cat and Rimmer in a sense. They have lived in a different universe, and they seem to get on with each other a lot more than we would expect of our Cat and Rimmer. But they're in a desperate situation. They're banding together.
Although Cat does call Rimmer Trans Am Wheel Arch Nostrils.
Yeah.
Which is a bit much. That's no smeghead, is it? It's not catchy, that.
There's a lot of that sort of stuff where they describe it. Crichton's head particularly gets a lot of...
Yes, yeah.
Shaped like a novelty condom, stuff like that.
Yeah. I take there's another line in here which I thought was noteworthy for our purposes, which is Rimmer says that Crichton and Lister are chained together like Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that's a reference to the Defiant Ones, isn't it?
Yeah. You know what? It's interesting. In this period, they start to put in American references because they were trying to sell the show to America. And... there's a particularly bad one. I think it must be series 3. Oh, it might be Time Slides, actually. They talk about what they could do if they could go back in time. And Lister sort of flippantly says, we could go back in time and persuade Dustin Hoffman not to make Ishtar. Now, nobody gets that now, right? Ishtar was a film made in the late 80s, which was a big flop. It was just a famous flop.
It was a famous flop. Office. Yeah, it's famous for being a flop.
In 1989, that was a great reference. When I watched it in like 1996 or whatever, when I was 12, no idea what that meant. Probably didn't even know who Dustin Hoffman was.
Yeah.
But certainly now, who the hell remembers Ishtar?
Well, who the hell remembers the Defiant Ones?
And then we have another kind of, just to sort of repeat what we were saying earlier, they're sat there and Crichton is going about her, like, he knows he's going to die, but it doesn't matter if he manages to save Lister's life. And Lister kind of has the whole thing of like, well, I made you break your programming, and that means you are culpable for your actions. If you were just a programmed mechanoid, you would not be judged, but because you have made choices, you will. And then, like, he feels guilty for that. And there's, again, it's just a little bit of an exploration of that philosophical idea.
Yeah.
Again, without really reaching any great conclusions. But in a sitcom, I think that's more than you usually get, isn't it? So
yeah, you don't get that in George and Mildred.
Oh, there's another element here as well. After some of the other people are killed, Crichton and Lister have to get through a security door, but because they are not recognised in this world, they can't get through with their palm print. And Lister does something to get them through, and Crichton, again, who is often unemotional, is absolutely sickened by Lister's actions. So he has emotions sometimes.
It's a nice bit of comic work from Llewellyn in this.
Logically, sir, there is only one way you could possibly have opened that door. I feel quite nauseous. Where is it?
Where's what?
Oh, sir, you've got it in your jacket!
I got it out of a hole, didn't I?
Oh, sir, you are sick! You are a sick, sick person!
Yeah, because the idea being that Lister has procured the palm print of another crew member by finding his detached hand.
Yeah.
My problem with this is the whole palm print scanner thing we have never seen before or since on any part of Red Dwarf for them to get through a door. And Holly, you presume Holly would just sort of let everyone through. Maybe usually they don't need to because Holly's just aware of where everyone is, but they are intruders, so they need to get through, I guess. Maybe that's the explanation. But yeah, I like that.
So now we have this sort of final confrontation. Lister's got the Inquisitor's gauntlet from the past. And we set up this sort of Wild West type shootout. It's funny you mentioned Gunmen of the Apocalypse earlier. Here we have them at each end of a corridor, and there is a sort of high noon element to it, isn't there?
Yeah.
But instead of 6 shooters, they're shooting this sort of timey-wimey nonsense at each other.
Unfortunately, instead of just killing him like he has done with everyone else, the Inquisitor decides to youth Lister just to play with him a bit.
Let the games begin.
Yeah, so he youths him and then turns him into an old man. So, fortunately, doesn't just kill him. It gives them time for Crichton to distract him. They manage to get control of the Inquisitor, and there the plan comes into action. They could just kill him, but Lister has a deeper plan that we don't know about, that he's going to erase his actions to bring everyone back to life.
Yes.
And so the conclusion is essentially Lister sets up a situation where the Inquisitor's life is at risk, and therefore, by saving his life, he is immune to erasure, because if he deletes Lister from time, he won't be there to save his life.
Yeah.
But then, of course, if he wouldn't be there to put it in danger in the first place. So
Classic error.
It's all a bit complex, but the Inquisitor thinks he has bested him. But yeah, Lister has used his brain for the first time in his life. So actually what he's done is rigged the gauntlet to delete the Inquisitor from time, thereby removing all his work.
So that's very nice, but why didn't he just erase him? If he got the gauntlet, why did he have to get him to do it to himself?
Good question.
Because Lister doesn't want to kill.
Because Lister is not a person who would kill. Yeah, maybe. He's just a fat little human with no balls.
So he sets up a contrived situation in which the person is defrauded into killing himself.
Yeah.
And so he's morally fine. Right, well, look, that's our episode. And everything is reset. We're all good to go again for the next episode. Yeah. Start again for Terraform.
It's nice. It's good. It's a nice little bit of sitcom plotting.
Good sitcom resetting.
It's good writing that.
So, before we finish our conversation about peak Red Dwarf, now might be a good time to talk about what other things our main cast did.
Yeah, I've had a look at what else everyone did in the 90s. I just thought I'd sort of compare to like this time period. Oh, this is sort of early 90s. The biggest one of the lot is Chris Barry. Mm-hmm. Because in 1991, which was sort of right between series 3 and 4, I think, or 4 and 5, he started the British Empire. And I think when you look at Chris Barry's career, the two big shows, that long-running shows, were the British Empire and Red Dwarf. The British Empire ran for several years, written by the people who brought us Chance in a Million.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
This was their biggest success as well, in terms of sitcom anyway. I think we'll probably talk about the British Empire one day. I'm not going to get into the detail of it.
I'm sure we will. I remember when the British Empire came on. Oh, great, it's Rimmer, I like him. And I really didn't like it. I didn't like it.
Yeah.
Basically, I didn't like it because he wasn't Rimmer. I suppose that's what it was. But I just gone back and watched the first episode of the British Empire this week.
Yeah.
Still don't like it.
Yeah.
The central character is really, really unlikable.
Yeah.
You can get away with that, but you've really got to... You need to have some sympathy for them. I just have no sympathy with Brutus.
No, I know what you mean.
It ran for a long time, didn't it, the British Empire?
Several years, yeah, throughout the 90s. And what he did immediately after the British Empire had finished was, I don't know if you remember this, a sitcom called A Prince Among Men.
Well, I didn't remember it, but you have also sent me the first episode of this, which I watched.
This did 2 series. I think it's called Gary Prince. He's supposed to be a...
Gary Prince, former England captain. And if you think my Scouse accent is bad, then let me tell you that Chris Barry, man of 1,000 voice, is not so great either.
How many times have I told you about putting things in front of these photos? You've covered up Princess Anne. That is practically treason.
Sorry.
Very proud of this photo. Princess Anne being introduced to me.
You've been introduced to Princess Anne, surely?
Hey, she said she was very pleased to meet me. I think she knows what she's talking about.
I remember this at the time, I think. I've definitely seen bits of it since. And it's not great. It's just a bit which is like, that's not enough. And 2 series it struggled through. And
well, it's the same problem as Brutus. He's basically an egotistical prick, this footballer. He's not a nice bloke. Do you think Chris Barry can do a nice person, a sympathetic character? Is that not in his range?
I do feel like maybe he's been a little bit stereotyped in that sense. Maybe. But I guess he's good at playing. He's got a very pompous sort of face. I think that helps.
I tell you what I did like about Prince Among Men. What he was doing was the 1997 stereotype of a flash rich footballer. And it was amazing to me how different that stereotype is to what it would be now.
Yeah.
Like, he was opening a supermarket in Widnes. you can't imagine Marcus Rashford doing that.
Well, this was early day. Well, it's just a few years into Premier League. Suddenly they were making much more money than, their father did. Do you know what I mean? They were still working class kids who had done well, but they weren't multi-millionaires. One other thing, Chris Barry in the 90s, he did try and break America slightly. He played the butler in an American
He was
film.
in the Angelina Jolie... Go on,
Tomb
tell me
Raider.
what the character's called. Tomb Raider, yes, thank
Lara
you. I
Croft,
remember him in that. They've made some new Tomb Raider films recently, haven't they?
Yeah.
But I'm talking classic Jolie Tomb Raider.
Yeah, which is it is a classic 90s action flick. Is it early 2000s? It might be. I can't remember. But
I remember
it
Chris
is that
Barry being
period.
that.
Yeah, and he's playing the stuck-up English butler, like a sort of Denham Elliott, John Gielgud type. It's a classic. It's a classic
It's
thing.
a good trope, isn't it?
And it didn't lead to anything else, sadly,
That's a
for
shame.
him in America. But fair enough. Craig Charles.
Oh, well, look, I'm going to preempt here because, again, I've watched this one episode you sent me of Captain Butler. Tell us about Captain Butler.
Captain Butler is basically Craig Charles' only other sitcom thing. It was the one attempt to kind of throw him in as a lead in a sitcom after his success with Red Dwarf. It's about a pirate captain who's actually a bit of a coward, and he's got a ragtag crew, and they have sort of wacky adventures on the high seas.
I don't think I've ever seen anything so cheap.
It is famously just awful. It's a bad show in all
The sets,
regards.
the costumes.
But
It looks
they're
like
on a ship. The sky, the blue sky, is a blue painted wall 3 feet behind them, and it's so apparent. Yeah. It's awful.
Sanjeev Bhaskar in it.
Yeah, and he was riding high. It's a sort of goodness gracious me time when he was.
Oh,
doing
was he? He wasn't
I think
before he
so,
was
yeah.
famous. It was okay.
97. I don't know. Goodness gracious me is about that time. 97. Yeah.
And the episode you sent me, we had a guest star portraying Lord Nelson, was Robert Llewellyn.
Yeah, that's why I sent that one to you specifically, because Robert Llewellyn was in it as well. Again, not really breaking the mold with his performance.
I say, we get you back to England, kit you up with a completely fresh team, and set you off to get back at the French.
Don't you think it's a bit soon after the last battle, sir?
Oh, nonsense, man. When the horse bucks you off, you've got to get straight back on. Now, I've got a major sea battle lined up for Thursday week. What say we put you in the frame for that?
I think I'm booked up next Thursday, sir.
What about Friday, then?
I think I've got a luncheon appointment.
Oh boy, it was pretty bad. So yeah, we've talked there about British Empire, Prince Among Men, and Captain Butler. And I didn't enjoy any of them. And you know, I would have liked at least 1 out of 3 hits there.
And that's it, frankly. We could argue Danny John Jules, he was in Maid Marian and a Merry Men. You could argue that's a sitcom for kids.
I think that is a sitcom. I think we've talked about this before. Rent a Ghost, Maid Marian. I think they qualify as sitcoms.
Yeah. But even in that, he's a tangential character. It's not like he's the lead or anything, But yeah, these guys didn't go on to have very productive careers outside of Red Dwarf. And I think that's a big part to its longevity.
That's why it's still going.
Not just them, but the writers as well.
You mentioned The Strangerers earlier. That was something that was something that Rob Grant went on to do afterwards. So tell us more about Strangerers. I sort of remember that. Was it on Sky?
Yes. At the end of Series 6, Rob Grant leaves Red Dwarf and, has never written for it again in the official capacity. So I think this is a good opportunity for us to catch up with Rob Grant and do a little kind of bio on him. We've talked about how him and Doug Naylor kind of got together in the first place, but Red Dwarf is basically the only sitcom they wrote. They were sketch guys and they did the Spitting Image and all that. Then they got Red Dwarf off the ground. And then one other thing that they did at this time period was a show called The 10%ers, which is set in a theatrical agency. And they did it as a pilot for ITV's equivalent of Comedy Playhouse, a sitcom pilot season. Off the back of that, they got 2 series out of it.
Oh, that's interesting. So you sent me the pilot, and because it was entitled Pilot, I assumed that meant it had gone nowhere.
Well, the reason I sent you that one is because between pilot and series, Rob Grant left the company. Well, like I say, he never left the company. They're always kind of involved with Grant Naylor Productions, but they stopped writing together. So the series itself was written by Doug Naylor and some other writers as well. But what I sent you, that pilot, is basically the only other sitcom thing they wrote together.
You said that's the last thing they wrote together.
Yeah, but also the only other sitcom thing they did, in terms of anything that actually got made. This was it in 93, 4, something like that. They decided to part ways. I don't know if there was any great kind of rift between them. I haven't heard either of them really talk about it directly, but it seems like, Rob Grant had enough. He wanted to move on and do some other things. And I think they'd just been working in each other's pockets for so long that, perhaps whatever tensions were there were getting to them, and they just decided to get away while they could. And, all that, like I said, in the early 2000s, they released the DVDs, got loads of extras, cast commentaries, interviews with all the creatives, and etc., etc. And Rob Grant's not involved in any of that, and I think that's quite telling. But he also now, Rob Grant, more recently, and during the lockdown particularly, he started doing a whole YouTube run of, talking about Red Dwarf with other people like Ed By and Paul Jackson and all this sort of stuff. They did loads of videos. Doug Naylor is not involved in any of that. And I know as well, this is quite recent news, in 2020, Doug Naylor left Grant Naylor Productions and they resolved it, and he came back in 2023. And that was some whole big legal dispute thing. They've resolved it now. And then not long after that is when all the Red Dwarf stuff started coming back online. And then they're all in like one play. They're all on iPlayer and stuff again now.
So it was in stasis for 3 years.
But this is all shenanigans and legal stuff. I don't know in terms of like their personal relationship, how well they got on during all that period or any of the last 20 years. I'm not sure. I've never seen them together. I've never seen them sort of talking about it. So I think they may have fallen out to some extent. And we'll deal with this later as well when we come back to Red Dwarf. Doug Naylor continued writing it. But Rob Grant, he left the show. He did do some other things though. So let's have a look at what other sitcom-y stuff he did.
Well, the 10%ers, just before we move off, I quite liked that. It was all right.
It was fine, wasn't it? It didn't blow me away, but it was all right.
It was better than the other three that we've just talked about.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, go on. Rob Grant.
Well, one thing he did was called Dark Ages.
Nope.
This was made in 1999, and it was set in 999.
Oh, clever.
The concept is that it's people in 999 coming up to the millennium, and they're freaking out about it, and there's sort of things about that.
Well, that was a real thing.
Exactly, which at the time was a real Millennium Bug kind of thing that they were playing on. And also, as from what I understand, it wasn't his original concept, but they brought him in to write it or something, which is, and it's set in the Dark Ages. The stars are Phil Jupitus, Alistair McGowan, and Pauline McLean, who was hot off Father Ted at the time. And I haven't been able to find much of it. I haven't been able to see. I've seen a couple of little clips, but the general feeling from everyone who's seen it is it's absolutely shite. It's total hogwash. Phil Jupitus can't act. And that seems to be the generally accepted opinion, and certainly it was not
quite a big star then, wasn't he? 1999.
But yeah, he's a big stand-up
panel
star.
Shows and
doesn't necessarily translate, does it? And then just the following year, 2000, The Strangerers.
Yes.
And this was a Sky One original production, and we talked about it briefly when we looked at Time, Gentlemen, Please, because it was the same. It was under the same stable.
So
as
that Jack Doherty and Mark Williams, who was Peterson in early Red Dwarf.
Yes, and it's made by Absolutely Productions. It is produced by that company. Obviously, that's the Absolutely guys, right? Yeah, Jack Doherty and Mark Williams are aliens who come down to Earth and they're in human form, but that means they're sort of still learning how to walk and talk and stuff like that, and they don't know how to kind of
comedy. That's my favourite kind of comedy.
Yeah. And so there's all that kind of shenanigans, and then they're being chased by some like government agents played by Mark Heap and Sarah Alexander.
I've literally never seen a single moment of this sitcom, but I know exactly what Mark Heap is doing.
So I've watched the first episode of this, which is actually a double episode, and to kind of set everything up. And I've read a bit about what people think of it. Some people say it's a bit underrated, and there's some nice moments in it. I watched there were nice moments, but like I watched a 40-odd minute episode, and I felt like there's 8 minutes of material here. It felt really dragged out. It felt like a sketch idea. Oh, what if this aliens are in Earth, and you could do a series of sketches about that? And today they're eating for the first time. That'll be funny, won't it? Oh, look, he's trying to flirt with a lady. That'll be funny. But it's not being tied together very well. And like I say, I haven't watched the whole series, so maybe that ties in a bit. But it feels slow. It does feel slow. Yeah. Maybe they could got like an hour and a half film out of it, the whole series. I don't know. But I'm not surprised it didn't go anywhere, put it that way. The performances by Williams and Doherty are, nothing special. Rob Grant, he continues to... He writes novels, actually. Here's an interesting thing. In the 90s, after they split, Rob Grant and Doug Naylor both wrote a Red Dwarf novel each.
Oh,
they collaborated on the first two, and then they wrote one each, because they'd gone their separate ways. And I suspect, I don't know this for sure, but I suspect they were under contract for 2 more novels, and so they went, let's split it and do one each rather than having to work together on 2. I suspect, I don't know.
So how does that work with the continuity what's canon?
The two separate novels are continuing from the previous novels, but they are separately written. So I'm not sure. I haven't read them yet, although I'm quite tempted to. I think I'm going to read the books.
Well,
again.
we always do bonus podcasts about spin-off movies. Maybe we should turn our hand to reading a couple of the novels and do a bonus podcast on that.
I'd be up for that. Yeah, let's do them one at a time and sort of see how we go.
Yeah,
see how we feel.
Yeah,
but let's try it. Yeah, let's try it. And just one last thing of Rob Grant. His most recent thing. He's recently teamed up with Andrew Marshall as of 2.4 Children.
Am I right? Is it Alexi Sale's stuff he wrote?
Yeah, and Hot Metal and all that.
Yeah.
So Andrew Marshall and Rob Grant quite recently have been writing for radio, sci-fi comedy on the radio called The Quandahorn Experimentations.
Oh, God. I know nothing about it other than its name, and it sounds very sixth form.
Well, it's a Quatermass thing, I listened to the first episode of that to see if I could, and I just could not. I couldn't do it. There's something about radio comedy, particularly, like it has to be done so well, or I just cannot bear it. And it's
I find radio drama difficult to, radio fiction. I find it very difficult to get into, engage with.
I agree, but it's very cheap, so you can throw things together quite easily.
I think sketch can work on radio quite well, but
yeah.
So I think we've probably finished with our peak Red Dwarf. So we've talked about series 3 to 6. Well, we've talked about series 1 to 6 now. What will come next? What will we do next?
So what I want to do, I want to split the rest of Red Dwarf into another 2 episodes. So there'll be 4 altogether, but I think Red Dwarf justifies it. So what comes next? And I know you're not aware of this because you stopped watching in the mid-90s.
Yeah, this is kind of where
you started drinking.
I parted company with reality.
Yeah. So there's a few-year gap here, and then they come back with Series 7 without Rob Grant. And that one definitely feels like the series that is a bit, they're still going, it's okay, but it's not quite as good. Then the next series is a real kind of reboot. They try and this is, I do respect, they've done this in the past, a big swing, try and do something completely different.
Change it all
For
up.
me, it doesn't work, but they go for it. I respect that. And that was the end of it, really, that it stopped. And then 10 years go by, and for whatever reason, which we'll get into later, they decide to have a go at a comeback. And they do a little sort of special, mini-series kind of special thing where they brought it back. And that ultimately sort of relaunched the New Birth. So what I want to do is the next episode is tackle that period. And then in a 4th episode, we can tackle the kind of, okay, they brought it back 30 years later. What's going on? And they've done a few series now. And so we can kind of look at that as a separate entity. But I want to go through the kind of what would be the awkward years, I guess. the sort of the death, the slow, painful death and rebirth of Red Dwarf in the next chapter.
Okay. All right. Well, that sounds interesting. As you said, I kind of, the end of series 6, I think is probably the last Red Dwarf I saw. And so I'm genuinely looking forward to seeing what happened next.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. It's going to be good.
So at this point, usually we say, well, what are your conclusions? What did you think? So even though we're much more familiar with this material than some of the other things we've looked at, what are your conclusions about peak Red Dwarf?
I love it, honestly. This is peak Red Dwarf for me. I do appreciate the first 2 series and all that, but this stuff, series 4 and 5 particularly, because I must have watched them so many times when I was a kid, and so there is a nostalgia element there, but there's a reason I watch them over and over again. I loved them. This little period of Red Dwarf would be up there for me in my kind of favourite sitcoms ever list. I don't know how much the rest of Red Dwarf and what's come after has sort of tainted that slightly as an overall picture. I don't know. But I love Red Dwarf. I think it's really, really well written. Surprising from a writing point of view that I don't seem to like anything else the writers have ever done. Do you know what really gets me is the sci-fi concepts as well. There's some really good sci-fi stuff here. You could take a Red Dwarf plot idea and make a feature-length film out of it. Absolutely no problem.
Definitely.
You could get 12 feature films out of this with different characters. You don't have to make them Red Dwarf films, but take that concept, a really good sci-fi concept, and you could do so much with it.
Right, I think that we should wrap up. So I've really enjoyed this. I hope our listeners have enjoyed it. I hope if we got any Red Dwarf nerds listening who don't usually listen to our podcast, I hope we've not offended you with our blundering around your beloved Red Dwarf. I can assure you that it's meant with affection. And you should listen to our episode on Please Sir. You might learn something. So we will see you all next time. What are we doing next, Alan?
Ooh, we always like to end our series on something a little bit more recent, which for us is sort of anything post 20th century. But we're going very recent, at least within 10 years.
Oh,
Fleabag. Oh, I'm looking forward to that one. Yeah.
No, I really enjoyed Fleabag at the time, and we started watching it again. I'm enjoying watching it again. I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Well, I've never watched it at the time. It's new to me, so I'm excited.
We will see our listeners next week for Fleabag. You can find us on social media. We're still on Twitter, and we're also on Instagram at BritComPod. And you can find us on Facebook too. If you just put British Sitcom History Podcast into the search bar, you'll find our page. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.